The steam rising from the industrial-sized soup kettles couldn't mask the precision with which Victoria Castellanos moved through the cramped galley kitchen. At 5:47 a.m., while most of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado Extension still slept, she was already calculating portion sizes for 3,000 meals with the methodical accuracy of someone whose life had once depended on precise measurements. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her weathered hands, scarred from years of kitchen burns and cuts, guided massive ladles through vats of scrambled eggs with movements that seemed almost choreographed. What the rushing sailors grabbing their breakfast trays never noticed was how those same hands never trembled, never hesitated, and never missed their intended target by even a fraction of an inch. The morning fog rolled off San Diego Bay like a gray curtain, wrapping around the utilitarian buildings of the base where Victoria had worked in relative anonymity for the past 18 months. Her supervisor, Petty Officer Ryan Webb, had long since stopped paying attention to the quiet woman who arrived first and left last, maintaining food service operations with an efficiency that bordered on supernatural. The other kitchen staff appreciated that she never complained about the grueling schedule, never called in sick, and somehow managed to keep the notoriously difficult enlisted personnel happy with meals that exceeded standard military fare by considerable margins. Victoria's daily routine began each morning at 05:00 hours, though she would have corrected anyone who noticed that she still thought in military time. The drive from her modest apartment in National City took exactly 23 minutes, a timing she had unconsciously optimized through routes that avoided traffic patterns and provided clear sight lines at every intersection. Her 15-year-old Honda Civic showed the wear of California coastal living, with paint faded from salt air and bumper stickers advertising local restaurants where she had never eaten. The car's most distinctive feature was something no one would ever see: a small compartment beneath the spare tire that contained documents she hoped never to need again. The security checkpoint at the base entrance represented the first of many daily interactions where Victoria's true capabilities remained carefully hidden. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Kane, a 20-year Navy veteran whose expanding waistline testified to his appreciation for good food, barely glanced at her identification card as she passed through the metal detectors each morning. His cursory attention reflected the general invisibility that civilian contractors enjoyed on military installations, particularly middle-aged women whose jobs involved feeding people rather than fighting them. Kane's security protocols were thorough for visitors and dignitaries, but Victoria had long since become part of the landscape, as unremarkable as the concrete barriers and chain-link fencing that surrounded the facility. The walk from the parking area to Mess Hall Delta 7 took Victoria past training facilities where young sailors learned skills that would define their naval careers. Through the windows of Building 23C, she could observe morning briefings where officers planned operations that ranged from routine training exercises to classified missions that would take teams into harm's way around the globe. Her pace never slowed as she passed these glimpses into the world she had once inhabited, though her eyes automatically cataloged details that most civilian observers would miss entirely. The positioning of guard posts, the rotation schedules of security patrols, the blind spots in surveillance camera coverage, all information that accumulated in her memory without conscious effort. The kitchen itself represented controlled chaos during the pre-dawn hours as staff prepared for the day's first meal service. Victoria's responsibilities officially included food preparation, inventory management, and equipment maintenance, tasks that she performed with competence that impressed supervisors without attracting unwanted attention. Her unofficial role had evolved into something approaching kitchen management, though she carefully avoided any appearance of seeking authority over her colleagues. The other workers, mostly civilian contractors like herself, appreciated her quiet leadership style and her ability to solve problems before they escalated into crises that might attract administrative scrutiny. Petty Officer Webb had inherited supervision of the food service operation 18 months earlier, shortly after Victoria's arrival at the base. His management philosophy emphasized maintaining adequate nutrition standards while avoiding complaints that might reflect poorly on his efficiency ratings. Victoria's consistent performance had allowed him to focus on administrative duties rather than day-to-day operational concerns, arrangement that benefited everyone involved. Webb's personnel files contained glowing evaluations of Victoria's work, though they described skills that represented only the most superficial aspects of her actual capabilities. The morning breakfast rush brought Victoria into contact with personnel from across the base, from junior enlisted sailors grabbing quick meals before training to senior officers whose conversations occasionally touched on operational matters that required classified clearances. Her position behind the serving line provided an excellent vantage point for observing the social dynamics and professional relationships that defined the base community. The young sailors appreciated her generous portions and genuine warmth, while senior personnel had grown accustomed to her professional discretion regarding overheard conversations. What none of them realized was that her friendly demeanor masked analytical skills that had once been considered among the finest in the United States Marine Corps. Lieutenant Sofia Rodriguez represented the type of young officer who reminded Victoria of why she had once believed so deeply in military service. Fresh from officer candidate school and assigned to her first operational posting, Rodriguez displayed the enthusiasm and dedication that characterized the best military personnel. Her attempts to engage Victoria in conversation revealed genuine interest in the experiences of support staff, an attitude that distinguished her from officers who treated civilian contractors as essentially invisible. Victoria found herself responding to Rodriguez's warmth with carefully measured friendliness that avoided crossing professional boundaries while acknowledging their shared respect for military traditions. The morning routine also brought Victoria into contact with members of the Maritime Precision Response Team, elite Navy SEALs whose training regimen required nutrition plans that exceeded standard meal service capabilities. Gunnery Sergeant Dale Foster, the team leader, had specifically requested modifications to breakfast offerings that would support the intense physical demands of their mission preparation. Victoria had accommodated these requests with efficiency. That impressed Foster, though he attributed her knowledge of performance nutrition to civilian culinary training rather than military experience. The SEAL's presence at the base reflected ongoing preparation for operations that remained classified, though Victoria's experienced eye could interpret training patterns that suggested imminent deployment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her interactions with Dr. Helen Nakamura, the base medical officer, provided insights into personnel issues that might affect operational readiness. Dr. Nakamura's regular visits to the mess hall ostensibly focused on nutrition standards and food safety protocols, but her conversations with Victoria often touched on broader concerns about military life and its effects on service members' well-being. Victoria's responses demonstrated understanding of military culture that exceeded what civilian contractors typically possessed, though she was careful to frame her knowledge in terms of observation rather than personal experience. These conversations had evolved into a professional friendship that both women valued, though neither fully understood the other's background. The base's operational tempo had increased noticeably during Victoria's tenure, with training exercises becoming more frequent and more intensive. Her position in the mess hall provided a unique perspective on these changes, as meal scheduling and portion requirements reflected the demands being placed on personnel. The arrival of specialized equipment and the presence of visiting personnel from other installations suggested preparation for significant operations, though the specific nature of these activities remained beyond Victoria's official need to know. Her experience enabled her to interpret these indicators with accuracy that would have surprised the intelligence analysts responsible for operational security. Captain Antonio Reeves represented the type of officer whose career priorities had gradually shifted from military excellence to personal advancement. His frequent appearances in the mess hall served multiple purposes, from conducting cursory inspections that satisfied administrative requirements to maintaining visibility with personnel who might influence his fitness reports. Victoria had observed Reeves's interactions with subordinates and noted patterns of behavior that suggested someone more concerned with appearances than substance. His treatment of civilian contractors reflected casual dismissal rather than professional respect, an attitude that Victoria found familiar from her previous military experience. The kitchen's equipment maintenance requirements provided Victoria with legitimate reasons to access areas of the base that might otherwise be restricted to civilian personnel. Her requests for repair services or supply deliveries enabled her to observe security procedures and operational activities that revealed information about the base's mission and capabilities. These observations accumulated into a comprehensive understanding of the facility's strengths and vulnerabilities, knowledge that she hoped would never become relevant, but felt compelled to maintain nonetheless. Her maintenance logs reflected meticulous attention to detail that impressed supervisors while concealing the broader significance of her systematic documentation. The afternoon shift brought different dynamics as the base community prepared for evening training exercises and administrative duties. Victoria's responsibilities during these hours focused on meal preparation for dinner service, though her actual activities often included equipment maintenance and inventory management that kept her visible throughout the facility. The reduced supervision during afternoon hours provided opportunities for more detailed observation of base operations, though she was careful to maintain the appearance of someone focused solely on food service responsibilities. Her movements through supply areas and maintenance facilities seemed routine to casual observers, though they enabled her to maintain current knowledge of the base's operational status. The relationship Victoria had developed with the kitchen staff reflected her natural leadership abilities while avoiding formal authority that might attract administrative attention. Her colleagues appreciated her willingness to handle difficult tasks and her ability to resolve conflicts before they escalated into problems that might affect their employment. The multicultural nature of the civilian workforce provided cover for Victoria's own background, as her fluency in Spanish and familiarity with military protocols could be attributed to previous employment rather than formal training. These relationships had evolved into genuine friendships that added personal stakes to her commitment to maintaining her cover identity. Chief Petty Officer Kane's security procedures had become routine interactions that Victoria navigated with practiced ease, though she remained alert to changes that might indicate heightened threat levels or operational tempo. Kane's casual attitude toward civilian contractors reflected institutional assumptions about support personnel that worked to Victoria's advantage, as increased scrutiny might reveal discrepancies in her background that could compromise her position. The security measures at the base were adequate for normal operations, though Victoria's trained eye identified vulnerabilities that could be exploited by adversaries with sufficient motivation and resources. The evening hours brought a different rhythm to base operations as day shift personnel prepared to depart and evening training activities commenced. Victoria's official duties typically concluded by 1800 hours, though she often remained later to complete preparation for the following day's meal service. These extended hours provided opportunities to observe activities that might be less visible during normal working hours, though she was careful to avoid areas where her presence might seem unusual or inappropriate. The evening departure routine enabled her to observe security procedures and personnel patterns that complemented her daytime observations. The drive home each evening provided time for Victoria to process the day's observations and consider their implications for the broader operational picture she was unconsciously maintaining. Her route varied slightly each day, a precaution that seemed excessive for a civilian contractor, but reflected habits that had once been essential for survival. The quiet neighborhood where she lived offered anonymity that complemented her low profile existence at the base, though she remained alert to any changes that might suggest compromised security. Her modest apartment contained few personal items that might reveal her true background, though careful observers might notice that her possessions showed signs of someone who valued quality and durability over appearance. The documentation that Victoria maintained regarding her work at the base served dual purposes of satisfying administrative requirements while providing her with detailed records of operational patterns and personnel activities. Her reports to supervisors emphasized operational efficiency and cost control, themes that resonated with military administrators focused on budget constraints and performance metrics. The underlying data she collected enabled her to track changes in base activities that might indicate shifting mission priorities or emerging security concerns, information that she hoped would remain merely academic but felt compelled to maintain nonetheless. The careful balance Victoria maintained between professional competence and personal invisibility required constant attention to details that might reveal more about her capabilities than was appropriate for her cover identity. Her interactions with military personnel reflected respect for rank and protocol that could be attributed to civilian employment on military installations, though her understanding of military culture exceeded what most contractors possessed. The relationships she had developed with base personnel provided valuable sources of information, while creating personal connections that complicated any future decisions about maintaining her cover identity. As Victoria completed another day in what appeared to be a routine civilian job, the accumulating evidence of increased operational tempo and the presence of elite personnel suggested that the quiet existence she had carefully constructed might soon face challenges that would test her commitment to remaining hidden. The skills that had once defined her identity remained sharp despite months of deliberate disuse, while the relationship she had built with base personnel created stakes that extended beyond her personal security. The convergence of these factors suggested that the carefully maintained separation between her past and present might not survive the demands of whatever operations were being planned within the classified corridors of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado Extension. The first indication that something was fundamentally wrong came during Victoria's third week at the base, though she wouldn't recognize its significance until much later. Lieutenant Rodriguez had mentioned, almost casually, that several Marine snipers from Camp Pendleton had been transferred to different units, following what the official reports described as training accidents. The conversation occurred during Rodriguez's morning coffee run, a routine that had evolved into brief but meaningful exchanges about military life and the challenges facing young service members. Victoria's hands had continued their methodical work preparing hash browns while Rodriguez spoke, but something in the lieutenant's tone suggested these weren't routine personnel reassignments. The careful way Rodriguez chose her words indicated someone who understood that certain topics required discretion, even in casual conversation. Victoria filed this information alongside dozens of other observations that painted a picture of institutional problems extending beyond the normal challenges of military operations. The second piece of the puzzle emerged 2 months later when Dr. Nakamura visited the mess hall during an unusually quiet afternoon. The medical officer's conversation had started with routine inquiries about food service operations, but gradually shifted to broader concerns about what she described as declining performance standards among specialized personnel. Dr. Nakamura spoke with the frustration of someone who had identified problems but lacked the authority to address their underlying causes. Victoria learned that marksmanship scores throughout the region had shown unexplained deterioration over the past 18 months, particularly among personnel assigned to precision shooting roles. The decline affected multiple installations and crossed service boundaries, suggesting systematic rather than localized issues. Dr. Nakamura's medical perspective focused on potential health factors, but Victoria's experience suggested that performance problems of this magnitude typically indicated training deficiencies or equipment failures rather than medical conditions. The third component of the emerging pattern became apparent through Victoria's interactions with members of the Maritime Precision Response Team. Gunnery Sergeant Foster had begun requesting specific nutritional supplements that supported extended periods of stress and fatigue, dietary changes that suggested his personnel were experiencing unusual physical demands. Foster's requests were accompanied by subtle indicators of frustration that exceeded normal pre-deployment tensions. Victoria's position serving meals to the SEAL team provided opportunities to observe their interactions and assess their readiness levels. The conversation she overheard suggested preparation for operations requiring precision shooting capabilities, though the team's confidence levels seemed inconsistent with their elite status. Foster's leadership style reflected someone compensating for deficiencies in his unit rather than building on established strengths, a management approach that Victoria recognized from her own experience with troubled military units. The connection between these seemingly unrelated observations crystallized when Victoria discovered the true identity of one of the transferred Marines that Rodriguez had mentioned. Staff Sergeant Miguel Santos had been reassigned to administrative duties following what official records described as a training incident, though Victoria's careful questioning revealed that Santos had been removed from sniper duties after missing targets during qualification exercises that should have been routine for someone of his experience level. Victoria's interest in Santos's situation extended beyond professional curiosity, though she was careful to frame her inquiries in terms of concern for a fellow service member rather than operational analysis. Her conversations with personnel who knew Santos painted a picture of a skilled marksman whose capabilities had deteriorated inexplicably, despite maintaining all other aspects of military performance. The pattern matched similar cases that Victoria had begun tracking through informal networks of base personnel who shared information during routine interactions. The investigation that Victoria conducted used methods that would have been familiar to intelligence analysts, though she maintained the appearance of casual interest rather than systematic inquiry. Her access to personnel throughout the base enabled her to gather information from multiple sources while avoiding the appearance of conducting unauthorized research. The picture that emerged suggested widespread problems with marksmanship training that extended throughout the regional military command structure. Captain Reeves's involvement in the situation became apparent through documentation that Victoria accessed during routine inventory management duties. His signature appeared on training reports and personnel evaluations that consistently minimized the significance of declining performance standards, attributing problems to temporary factors rather than systematic issues. Reeves's reports to higher command emphasized maintaining operational readiness statistics that supported his own performance evaluations, while obscuring the underlying problems that threatened actual mission capabilities. Victoria's analysis of the available evidence suggested that training protocols had been modified to prioritize cost reduction and time efficiency over the meticulous preparation that precision shooting required. The changes appeared designed to meet administrative metrics rather than operational requirements, a prioritization that inevitably compromised the skills that made the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The pattern was familiar from her own military experience, though the scale and systematic nature of the current problems exceeded anything she had previously encountered. The personal dimension of the situation became devastatingly clear when Victoria learned that her son, Corporal Miguel Castellanos, had been killed in Afghanistan 6 months earlier during an operation that required precision fire support. The official reports described his death as resulting from enemy action during a complex engagement, though Victoria's understanding of military operations enabled her to read between the lines of sanitized accounts that protected institutional reputation rather than acknowledging operational failures. Miguel had been a Marine Scout sniper whose skills had been developed through the same training programs that were now producing substandard results throughout the regional command. His letters home during his final deployment had mentioned concerns about equipment reliability and training standards that his superiors had dismissed as normal pre-deployment anxiety. Victoria's motherly pride in his achievements had prevented her from recognizing that his concerns reflected systematic problems rather than individual nervousness. The investigation that followed Miguel's death had concluded that he had been killed while providing overwatch for a patrol that came under attack in a contested area of Helmand Province. The circumstances described in official reports suggested that he had been unable to provide effective fire support due to equipment malfunction, though Victoria's experience suggested that properly trained snipers could compensate for most equipment problems through superior technique and battlefield awareness. Victoria's decision to seek employment at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado extension had been motivated by grief and a desire to understand the circumstances that had led to her son's death. Her background in food service provided legitimate credentials for civilian employment, while her military experience enabled her to navigate base procedures and gain access to information that civilian investigators couldn't obtain. The 18 months she had spent at the base had provided her with comprehensive understanding of current training standards and their deficiencies. The pattern of declining marksmanship performance that Victoria had identified matched the problems that had likely contributed to Miguel's death, though proving the connection required evidence that exceeded her current access level. The systematic nature of the training failures suggested institutional corruption or incompetence that extended throughout the command structure, problems that could only be addressed through intervention at the highest levels of military authority. Dr. Nakamura's medical records provided additional evidence of the scope of the problem, though the information required careful interpretation to understand its significance. Performance anxiety and stress-related symptoms among precision shooters had increased substantially, though medical evaluations consistently attributed these issues to individual rather than systematic factors. The pattern suggested that personnel were being asked to perform missions for which their training had been inadequate, a situation that created psychological pressure in addition to operational risk. Lieutenant Rodriguez's growing concerns about personnel welfare reflected the perspective of a young officer who recognized problems but lacked the experience or authority to address their underlying causes. Her conversations with Victoria had evolved into informal counseling sessions, where she could express frustrations that weren't appropriate for official channels. Rodriguez's observations confirmed that the problems Victoria had identified extended beyond marksmanship into broader areas of military readiness and institutional integrity. The Maritime Precision Response Team's mission preparation provided Victoria with direct evidence of how training deficiencies affected elite units tasked with the most demanding operations. Foster's attempts to compensate for his team's limitations through extended training hours and specialized equipment represented the kind of desperate measures that indicated systematic failure rather than individual deficiencies. The team's upcoming deployment would test capabilities that had been compromised by institutional decisions prioritizing administrative convenience over operational effectiveness. Victoria's position in the mess hall enabled her to observe the psychological toll that these problems imposed on military personnel, who understood the life-and-death implications of degraded performance standards. The conversation she overheard revealed stress levels that exceeded normal pre-deployment concerns, reflecting awareness that current training might be inadequate for the missions they would be required to perform. The morale problems that resulted from this awareness created additional operational risks that compounded the effects of technical deficiencies. The documentation that Captain Reeves had signed to authorize these training modifications revealed a pattern of decision-making that prioritized career advancement over military effectiveness. His evaluations consistently emphasized efficiency metrics and cost savings, while minimizing the significance of performance problems that threatened operational capabilities. The systematic nature of these decisions suggested deliberate policy, rather than administrative oversight, indicating corruption that extended throughout the command structure. Victoria's analysis of personnel records revealed that the problems she had identified affected multiple military occupational specialties. Though the impact on precision shooting roles was particularly severe due to specialized nature of those skills, the training modifications that had been implemented represented fundamental changes to established procedures that had been developed through decades of operational experience. The decision to abandon proven methods in favor of cost-effective alternatives demonstrated institutional failure that threatened the lives of service members and the success of military operations. The scope of the corruption that Victoria had uncovered extended beyond individual careers to encompass systematic fraud that had diverted resources intended for training into personal enrichment schemes. Captain Reeves and his associates had created networks of contractors and suppliers who provided substandard services while charging premium rates, generating profits that were distributed among participants in the conspiracy. The training programs that suffered as a result of these arrangements produced personnel whose skills were inadequate for the missions they would be required to perform. The evidence that Victoria had gathered through 18 months of careful observation painted a picture of institutional betrayal that had cost military lives while enriching corrupt officers who prioritized personal gain over professional responsibility. The connection between these systematic failures and her son's death provided personal motivation that transformed her investigation from intellectual exercise into moral imperative. The knowledge that similar failures continued to threaten current service members created urgency that would soon require her to abandon the anonymity she had carefully maintained. The approaching deployment of the Maritime Precision Response Team represented an immediate test of training standards that Victoria knew were inadequate for the mission requirements that Foster's personnel would face. The team's preparation revealed gaps in capabilities that reflected the systematic problems she had identified, though Foster's leadership prevented his personnel from recognizing the full extent of their disadvantages. The upcoming operation would likely result in casualties that could be prevented through proper intervention, though such action would require Victoria to reveal knowledge and capabilities that would compromise her cover identity. Dr. Nakamura's increasing concerns about personnel readiness reflected growing recognition that current problems exceeded the scope of medical intervention, though her position prevented her from addressing the training and leadership failures that created the underlying issues. Her informal alliance with Victoria had provided emotional support during a period of professional frustration, though neither woman fully understood how their respective expertise might complement efforts to address the systematic problems they had both identified. Lieutenant Rodriguez's development as a military officer had been shaped by exposure to institutional failures that challenged her idealistic expectations about military service, though her fundamental integrity prevented her from accepting corruption as inevitable. Her relationship with Victoria had provided mentorship that helped her navigate the complex ethical challenges that young officers faced when confronting systematic problems that exceeded their authority to address. The lessons she learned from these experiences would influence her approach to leadership throughout her military career. The convergence of operational requirements and institutional failures that Victoria had been tracking through her investigation suggested that the carefully maintained separation between her current identity and her previous military experience would soon become impossible to sustain. The skills that had once defined her professional identity remained sharp despite months of deliberate concealment, while the relationship she had developed with base personnel created personal stakes that extended beyond her original motivation for seeking employment at the facility. As Victoria prepared for another day of routine food service operations, the evidence she had accumulated regarding systematic training failures and institutional corruption created moral obligations that challenged her commitment to maintaining the anonymity that had enabled her investigation. The approaching crisis that would test the Maritime Precision Response Team's inadequate capabilities suggested that the time for passive observation was ending, though intervention would require revelations that would transform her carefully constructed civilian identity and expose her to risks that extended far beyond personal embarrassment or administrative inconvenience. The emergency alarm that shattered the pre-dawn quiet of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado Extension sent personnel scrambling toward their duty stations with the controlled urgency that characterized military responses to genuine crises. Victoria had arrived for her usual 0500 shift to find the base transformed from its routine operational tempo into a hive of activity that indicated something far beyond normal training exercises. The parking areas filled with vehicles that weren't typically present during standard operations, while the communications equipment visible through Building 23C windows showed the distinctive patterns of emergency coordination. Commander Blake Harrison's voice echoed through the base public address system with announcements that carefully avoided classified information while conveying the gravity of the situation developing beyond the base perimeter. A civilian research vessel conducting marine biology studies off Catalina Island had been seized by armed terrorists who were demanding the release of prisoners held in federal facilities throughout California. The 12 scientists and crew members aboard the vessel represented not only innocent hostages, but also potential intelligence assets whose research had implications for national security programs that remained classified at the highest levels. The terrorist organization responsible for the seizure had identified themselves as members of an international network with sophisticated understanding of American military capabilities and response procedures. Their demands included specific prisoners whose release would compromise ongoing counterterrorism operations throughout the Pacific region, while their choice of target suggested detailed intelligence about research programs that weren't supposed to be known outside the most restricted government circles. The implications extended far beyond a simple hostage situation into potential national security breaches that required immediate and decisive response. The Maritime Precision Response Team had been activated for immediate deployment to resolve the crisis through whatever means proved necessary, though the operational parameters clearly favored a rescue operation that would preserve both hostage lives and operational security. Gunnery Sergeant Foster received his mission briefing in the secure conference room adjacent to Building 23C, where classified materials outlined intelligence estimates and tactical options that would guide the team's approach to what everyone understood was an extraordinarily dangerous operation. Victoria's position in the mess hall provided her with an excellent vantage point for observing the preparation activities that revealed the scope and complexity of the developing operation. The personnel movement patterns indicated coordination with multiple agencies beyond the base's normal operational partners, while the equipment being loaded onto transport vehicles suggested capabilities that exceeded routine maritime operations. The timeline being discussed in overheard conversations indicated that the terrorists had established deadlines that would force American forces to act within hours rather than days. The intelligence briefing that Foster received painted a picture of adversaries who had chosen their target in timing with sophisticated understanding of American response capabilities and limitations. The research vessel's location in international waters complicated the legal and political aspects of any rescue operation, while the terrorists' demonstrated knowledge of classified research programs suggested inside information that made operational security a critical concern. The hostages included several scientists whose capture would provide enemies with access to research that could compromise American technological advantages in multiple fields. Foster's assessment of his team's readiness for this mission reflected the confidence that elite units typically displayed when facing challenging operations, though Victoria's trained eye detected underlying concerns that suggested awareness of capability gaps that might prove critical under extreme conditions. The SEAL team's recent training performance had shown inconsistencies that reflected the systematic problems Victoria had been tracking, though Foster's leadership had prevented these issues from appearing in official readiness reports that might have compromised the team's deployment status. The tactical challenges presented by the hostage situation required precision shooting capabilities that pushed the boundaries of what current training standards had prepared the team to accomplish. The research vessel's configuration provided limited approach options while offering the terrorists defensive advantages that would require extraordinary marksmanship to overcome without endangering the hostages. The timeline constraints imposed by the terrorists' demands eliminated options for extended preparation or specialized equipment that might compensate for training deficiencies. Captain Reeves appeared in the operations center with his characteristic confidence, though his involvement in mission planning revealed gaps in understanding that reflected his prioritization of administrative advancement over operational expertise. His recommendations emphasized approaches that would minimize political complications and administrative scrutiny rather than maximizing the probability of mission success, suggestions that created tension with personnel whose focus remained on tactical effectiveness rather than career protection. The weather conditions developing around Catalina Island added additional complexity to an already challenging operation, with winds and visibility that would affect both approach options and shooting accuracy for any precision engagement that might become necessary. The meteorological reports indicated conditions that would test equipment limitations and human performance standards under circumstances that demanded absolute precision, factors that amplified the significance of any training deficiencies that might affect team performance. Dr. Nakamura's medical preparation for potential casualties reflected her growing concerns about the team's readiness for operations that exceeded their recent training experience, though her position prevented her from expressing these reservations through official channels. Her private conversations with Victoria had revealed professional frustrations about medical support being requested for operations where the underlying training problems increased casualty risks beyond acceptable levels, concerns that reflected broader institutional failures that extended beyond individual unit readiness. Lieutenant Rodriguez found herself assigned to coordination duties that provided her with comprehensive overview of the operation's complexity and the challenges facing the response team, responsibilities that exceeded her previous experience, while highlighting the systematic problems that Victoria had been investigating. Her observations of the planning process revealed decision-making patterns that prioritized operational expediency over thorough preparation, approaches that reflected institutional pressures rather than tactical considerations. The equipment inspection that Foster conducted revealed maintenance issues that reflected the same cost-cutting measures that Victoria had identified in other areas of base operations, though the immediate operational requirements prevented addressing these problems through proper repair procedures. The team's sniper rifles showed signs of inadequate maintenance that could affect accuracy under the extreme conditions they would face, while the specialized ammunition available for the mission included supplies that had exceeded recommended storage periods without proper environmental controls. Victoria's observation of these preparation activities confirmed her assessment. that the team was being deployed with capabilities that were inadequate for the mission requirements, though Foster's leadership prevented his personnel from recognizing the full extent of their disadvantages. The systematic training failures that she had documented were about to be tested under conditions where the consequences of institutional corruption would be measured in American lives rather than administrative metrics, a situation that demanded intervention regardless of personal cost. The intelligence update that arrived during the morning briefing revealed that the terrorists had demonstrated their willingness to execute hostages by killing one of the research vessel's crew members, an escalation that eliminated diplomatic options and created urgency that would force immediate military action. The brutality of this demonstration suggested adversaries who understood that time pressure would force American forces to act before optimal preparation could be completed. A tactical approach that maximized the disadvantages created by inadequate training and equipment maintenance. Foster's final briefing to his team reflected his attempts to compensate for known deficiencies through leadership and tactical innovation, though Victoria's experience suggested that individual initiative couldn't overcome systematic failures that affected fundamental skills required for precision operations. The team's confidence levels remained high despite subtle indicators of stress that reflected unconscious awareness of preparation gaps that exceeded normal pre-mission concerns, psychological factors that could affect performance under the extreme pressure of actual combat operations. The deployment timeline that emerged from the planning sessions indicated that the team would launch within 6 hours, a schedule that eliminated opportunities for additional preparation or equipment modification that might address the problems Victoria had identified. The operational requirements demanded capabilities that the current training standards hadn't adequately developed, while the equipment available for the mission included systems that hadn't received the maintenance attention necessary for reliable performance under combat conditions. Commander Harrison's assessment of the mission parameters reflected his understanding that the operation represented an extraordinarily challenging test of unit capabilities under conditions that provided minimal margin for error, though his position required him to express confidence in his personnel regardless of private concerns about their readiness. His command decisions emphasized aggressive action that would minimize hostage casualties, while acknowledging that the tactical requirements exceeded the comfortable limits of routine operations. The support personnel assigned to assist with mission preparation included specialists whose expertise revealed additional dimensions of the operation's complexity, though their assessments consistently identified challenges that exceeded the team's recent training experience. The communications requirements alone demanded coordination skills that hadn't been thoroughly tested, while the medical support planning reflected casualty expectations that suggested anticipated difficulties during mission execution. Victoria's position during these preparation activities enabled her to assess the full scope of problems that threatened mission success, while maintaining her cover as a civilian contractor, whose presence attracted minimal attention from personnel focused on operational planning. Her analysis of the tactical requirements confirmed that the operation demanded precision shooting capabilities that exceeded what the current training standards had prepared the team to accomplish, though intervention would require revealing expertise that would compromise the anonymity she had maintained for 18 months. The parallels between the current mission requirements and the circumstances that had led to her son's death became increasingly apparent as Victoria observed the preparation activities that revealed systematic failures affecting every aspect of the team's capabilities. The same institutional corruption that had compromised Miguel's training was now threatening the lives of personnel whose mission success depended on skills that hadn't been properly developed, a situation that transformed her investigation from academic exercise into immediate moral imperative. The equipment loading process revealed additional maintenance problems that reflected Captain Reeves's cost-cutting measures, though the operational timeline prevented addressing these issues. through proper repair procedures that would ensure reliable performance under combat conditions. The systematic nature of these problems confirmed Victoria's assessment that institutional corruption had created widespread deficiencies that threatened military effectiveness across multiple operational areas, problems that demanded comprehensive intervention at the highest levels of command authority. Dr. Nakamura's final medical briefing emphasized casualty treatment procedures that reflected her expectation of injuries resulting from operational complications rather than enemy action. Medical preparation that acknowledged the increased risks created by inadequate training and equipment maintenance. Her professional assessment suggested that the team was being deployed with capabilities that were insufficient for the mission requirements, though her position prevented her from expressing these concerns through channels that might affect operational decisions. The intelligence analyst's final assessment painted a picture of adversaries who had planned their operation with sophisticated understanding of American response capabilities and limitations, tactical knowledge that suggested inside information about training standards and equipment readiness that would affect the rescue team's performance. The terrorists' confidence in their defensive positions reflected awareness of American capability gaps that could be exploited through proper timing and tactical positioning. Foster's leadership during the final preparation phase demonstrated his recognition that the mission would test his team's capabilities beyond their recent experience, though his confidence in their fundamental skills prevented him from acknowledging the systematic problems that Victoria had identified. His tactical planning emphasized approaches that would maximize the advantages of surprise and superior equipment, while minimizing exposure to situations that might reveal training deficiencies, strategies that reflected unconscious awareness of capability limitations. The final mission briefing revealed operational parameters that demanded precision shooting under conditions that would challenge the most experienced snipers, requirements that exceeded what the team's recent training had prepared them to accomplish. With confidence, the target identification and engagement procedures required skills that demanded perfect execution under extreme stress, capabilities that couldn't be improvised during actual combat operations, regardless of individual courage or determination. Lieutenant Rodriguez's observation of the final preparation activities provided her with comprehensive understanding of the challenges facing the response team, though her position prevented her from expressing concerns about readiness issues that exceeded her authority to address. Her growing awareness of systematic problems that affected multiple aspects of military operations created professional frustrations that reflected broader institutional failures that demanded intervention at levels beyond individual unit capabilities. As the Maritime Precision Response Team prepared for deployment to what everyone understood would be an extraordinarily dangerous mission, Victoria faced the decision that would determine whether her 18 months of investigation would result in action that could prevent the catastrophic consequences of systematic training failures and institutional corruption. The skills that had once defined her professional identity remained sharp despite deliberate concealment, while the moral obligations created by her knowledge of the team's inadequate capabilities demanded intervention that would expose her to risks extending far beyond personal embarrassment or administrative inconvenience. The moment had arrived when passive observation would become active participation, though the transformation would require revelations that would fundamentally alter her relationship with the base community and expose her to scrutiny that could compromise both her investigation and her personal security. The approaching crisis represented both the ultimate test of her commitment to protecting military personnel and the opportunity to address the systematic failures that had cost her son's life while threatening the lives of current service members, whose mission success depended on capabilities that institutional corruption had systematically undermined. The silence that followed Victoria's quiet declaration stretched across the operations center like a physical presence, broken only by The steady hum of communications equipment and the distant sound of helicopter rotors warming up on the flight line. Every eye in the room focused on the woman in the faded kitchen uniform who had just volunteered to accomplish what the base's most elite warriors weren't certain they could achieve. The transformation in her posture was subtle but unmistakable. To those trained to recognize command presence, though most of the assembled personnel remained too shocked to process what they were witnessing. Gunnery Sergeant Foster's initial reaction reflected the protective instincts that experienced military leaders developed when civilians offered assistance in situations far beyond their comprehension. His weathered face showed the kind of patience that senior non-commissioned officers reserved for well-meaning but misguided suggestions from people who didn't understand the realities of combat operations. The kindness in his voice couldn't quite mask the dismissiveness as he prepared to redirect the conversation back to practical planning matters. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern for our personnel," Foster began, his tone carrying the gentle firmness that career military professionals used when addressing civilian misconceptions about their capabilities. "But what we're discussing here is a precision shooting operation that will require capabilities developed through years of specialized training under the most demanding conditions. The target engagement parameters alone would challenge snipers with decades of combat experience." Commander Harrison's expression reflected the administrative concern of someone whose responsibility included maintaining proper protocols during high-stress situations that could easily spiral beyond institutional control. His glance toward Chief Petty Officer Kane suggested awareness that allowing civilian personnel to participate in operational planning discussions might violate security regulations that could complicate his command authority regardless of mission outcomes. Victoria's response came with the calm certainty of someone who had spent months preparing for exactly this moment, though her words carried undertones that suggested knowledge extending far beyond what food service personnel should possess. "Commander, I understand the tactical requirements better than you might expect," she said, her voice gaining authority that hadn't been present during 18 months of humble service in the mess hall. "The target engagement distance is approximately 800 meters with crosswinds that will require compensation techniques that aren't taught in current training curricula." The specificity of her assessment created the first crack in the dismissive confidence that had greeted her initial offer, though most personnel remained focused on the incongruity of receiving tactical analysis from someone whose official duties involved serving meals rather than conducting military operations. Dr. Nakamura's expression showed the particular confusion of someone whose scientific training emphasized evidence-based conclusions that seemed impossible to reconcile with current observations. Lieutenant Rodriguez felt the cognitive dissonance most acutely, as her developing relationship with Victoria had provided insights into the older woman's character without revealing anything that suggested military expertise. The transformation she was witnessing challenged fundamental assumptions about the people she worked with daily, forcing her to reconsider conversations and observations that had seemed routine but might have contained hidden significance. "Captain." Reeves's reaction revealed the specific alarm that corrupt officials experienced when carefully constructed facades began showing cracks that might expose underlying deceptions. His face showed not surprise at Victoria's technical knowledge, but recognition that her presence at the base might represent threats to arrangements that depended on institutional ignorance rather than operational effectiveness. The calculation in his eyes suggested someone whose primary concern involved protecting personal interests rather than mission success. Victoria reached into the worn leather purse that had become as familiar to base personnel as her daily presence in the mess hall, extracting documents that she placed on the nearest table with movements that suggested reverence for materials that carried profound personal significance. The identification cards and certificates that emerged told a story that would fundamentally alter everyone's understanding of the woman they thought they knew. Petty Officer Kane, approached the documents with the professional skepticism that security specialists developed toward anything that seemed too extraordinary to be genuine, though his expression began changing as he processed information that exceeded his clearance level to verify independently. The classification markings alone indicated authority that surpassed anything he had encountered during 20 years of military service, while the photograph showed a younger version of Victoria, wearing dress blues that identified her as someone whose achievements had earned recognition at the highest levels of military hierarchy. "Commander," Kane announced, his voice carrying the subdued awe that experienced military personnel reserve for encountering living legends. "Mrs. Castellanos' credentials show active security clearances and operational authority that exceed our base classification levels. The verification systems are requesting confirmation through Special Operations Command for someone designated under—" He paused, checking the documents again to ensure accuracy. "Ghost Eye Protocol. Executive Authority." The silence that followed Kane's announcement was profound and complete, as everyone present processed implications that challenged their understanding of both current circumstances and the past. 18 months of routine interactions with someone they had considered entirely unremarkable. The Ghost Eye designation carried legendary status within special operations communities, representing capabilities that existed at the intersection of technical perfection and operational artistry that few individuals ever achieved. Foster's reaction demonstrated the fundamental shift in perspective that occurred when career military professionals recognized that their assumptions about civilian personnel had been completely wrong. His defensive posture collapsed as he realized that his dismissive attitude toward Victoria might represent the most serious error of judgment in his military career, while his tactical assessment of the mission began incorporating possibilities that hadn't existed moments earlier. Commander Harrison moved to examine Victoria's credentials personally, his expression shifting from administrative concern to professional respect as he processed authorization levels that placed her operational authority beyond his ability to question or restrict. The documents revealed service records that included achievements in precision shooting that had established performance standards still used throughout the military, accomplishments that transformed the current tactical situation from impossible challenge to potentially manageable operation. Victoria removed the hairnet and apron that had defined her appearance during 18 months of deliberate anonymity, revealing bearing and presence that commanded immediate attention from everyone in the operations center. When she spoke again, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command responsibilities in the highest stakes situations that military forces encountered. "Commander Harrison," Victoria announced, her transformation from kitchen worker to operational commander complete and irreversible. "Contact Special Operations Command and request immediate verification for Master Gunnery Sergeant Victoria Castellanos. Designated call sign Ghost Eye 7. Inform them that Ghost Eye is requesting operational authority for emergency precision engagement in maritime counter-terrorism operations." The response from Special Operations Command arrived with a priority that indicated the Ghost Eye designation carried significance extending far beyond routine operational authority. The verification confirmed that Victoria possessed active status as a specialized consultant with authority to assume command of precision shooting operations when circumstances required capabilities that exceeded standard unit training. Her service record included establishing marksmanship records that remained unbroken after 15 years and developing training techniques that had been adopted throughout the special operations community. Foster approached Victoria with the respect that experienced warriors accorded to those whose achievements exceeded their own considerable accomplishments, though his understanding of tactical realities forced him to address practical concerns that could affect mission success, regardless of individual capabilities. "Master Gunnery Sergeant, your record is extraordinary, but the equipment we have available might not meet the specifications that your techniques require. Our sniper systems haven't received the maintenance attention that precision operations demand. Victoria's assessment of the available equipment revealed knowledge that exceeded what most personnel possessed regarding the weapon systems they used regularly, identifying problems that confirmed her investigation of systematic maintenance failures while demonstrating expertise that enabled her to propose solutions that hadn't occurred to others. Her examination of the primary sniper rifle revealed issues that she could address through field modifications that would restore performance capabilities to acceptable levels. This weapon can perform the mission, Victoria explained as she conducted adjustments that transformed the rifle from marginal to optimal configuration. But the scope mounting system has been compromised by improper installation that affects accuracy beyond 300 meters. The barrel harmonics have been altered by cleaning, procedures that don't account for the precision tolerances that these systems require. Dr. Nakamura observed Victoria's technical work with fascination that reflected her scientific training, recognizing expertise that operated at levels she had never previously encountered. Despite her exposure to military operations throughout her medical career, the precision of Victoria's adjustments suggested understanding of mechanical principles that exceeded formal training, reflecting experience that could only be developed through years of practical application under demanding conditions. Lieutenant Rodriguez found herself documenting procedures that weren't recorded in any training manual she had encountered, observing techniques that represented innovations in precision shooting that had been developed through classified programs that remained unknown to conventional military training establishments. Victoria's willingness to share this knowledge reflected her recognition that current circumstances required capabilities that couldn't be developed through normal training. Timelines. The ballistics calculations that Victoria performed incorporated environmental factors that exceeded the sophistication of computer modeling systems available to most military units, demonstrating analytical capabilities that reflected years of experience operating under conditions that demanded perfect accuracy under extreme pressure. Her assessment of wind patterns and atmospheric conditions revealed understanding of meteorological effects that most snipers never developed despite extensive training. Captain Reeves attempted to maintain some influence over the developing situation through administrative objections that emphasized regulatory compliance rather than operational effectiveness, though his authority had effectively evaporated once Victoria's true credentials became known. His protests reflected desperation rather than legitimate concern, revealing someone whose position depended on institutional ignorance rather than professional competence. Master Gunnery Sergeant, Reeves protested with diminishing conviction. Operational protocols require adherence to established command structures that can't be altered based on individual capabilities regardless of past achievements. These procedures exist to maintain order and accountability throughout the chain of command. Victoria's response demonstrated the kind of professional courtesy that experienced military personnel showed toward incompetent officers while making clear that such courtesy had limits that shouldn't be tested during operational crises. Captain Reeves, your concerns about protocol are noted and will be addressed through appropriate channels after mission completion. Current circumstances require focus on operational effectiveness rather than administrative convenience. The intelligence briefing that Victoria requested revealed her familiarity with analytical procedures that enabled her to extract tactical significance from information that others had processed, without recognizing its implications for precision. Engagement operations. Her questions demonstrated understanding of terrorist tactics and defensive positioning that reflected experience with similar operations, though the classified nature of her background prevented detailed discussion of specific precedents. Foster's briefing of his team incorporated Victoria's tactical recommendations, while acknowledging that their role in the operation would be modified to account for capabilities that exceeded their recent training experience. The psychological adjustment required for elite personnel to accept assistance from someone they had considered a civilian contractor created additional challenges that reflected broader institutional problems with recognizing expertise that didn't conform to expected patterns. The equipment preparation that Victoria supervised revealed maintenance problems that extended throughout the base's inventory of precision weapons, confirming her assessment that systematic cost-cutting had compromised operational readiness across multiple capabilities. Her field repairs addressed immediate mission requirements while documenting problems that would require comprehensive investigation to prevent future operational failures. Dr. Nakamura's medical preparation for the mission incorporated Victoria's assessment of injury patterns that might result from precision engagement operations conducted under extreme conditions, medical planning that reflected understanding of ballistics effects that exceeded standard trauma protocols. The collaboration between military medical expertise and special operations experience produced casualty treatment procedures that enhanced survival probabilities for both rescue personnel and hostages. The communications equipment that Victoria tested revealed additional maintenance problems that threatened mission coordination capabilities, though her technical knowledge enabled her to identify workarounds that would ensure reliable contact between operational elements during critical phases of the rescue operation. Her familiarity with communication systems reflected experience with operations that required coordination between multiple specialized units operating under extreme conditions. Lieutenant Rodriguez's role in mission coordination expanded to include liaison duties that would enable her to observe Victoria's operational techniques while maintaining communication with higher command levels that needed continuous updates regarding mission progress. The learning opportunity represented professional development that would influence her approach to military leadership throughout her career, though the immediate demands of operational preparation limited her ability to process the significance of what she was witnessing. The weather assessment that Victoria conducted incorporated techniques for analyzing atmospheric conditions that affected precision shooting accuracy, meteorological knowledge that enabled her to predict environmental changes that could affect mission success during the extended timeline that rescue operations typically required. Her ability to plan for changing conditions reflected experience with operations where environmental factors proved as challenging as enemy resistance. Commander Harrison's coordination with higher command levels incorporated Victoria's operational requirements while maintaining security protocols that protected classified aspects of her background from personnel who lacked appropriate clearance levels. The administrative challenges of integrating legendary capabilities with current operations required diplomatic skills that reflected his experience managing complex interagency relationships during previous crisis situations. The final equipment inspection that Victoria conducted revealed her satisfaction with modifications that had transformed marginally functional systems into precision instruments capable of supporting the most demanding engagement scenarios. Her technical work had addressed systematic maintenance failures while demonstrating techniques that would enhance operational capabilities throughout the special operations community, contributions that extended beyond immediate mission requirements. Foster's final briefing acknowledged that the mission parameters had been fundamentally altered by Victoria's participation, though his confidence in mission success had increased substantially based on capabilities that exceeded anything his team had previously experienced. The tactical advantages created by Victoria's expertise provided margins for error that transformed the operation from desperate gamble into calculated risk with acceptable probability of success. As the Maritime Precision Response Team prepared for deployment with capabilities that now matched the extraordinary demands of their mission, Victoria faced the personal cost of abandoning the anonymity that had enabled her investigation while accepting responsibilities that would expose her to scrutiny extending far beyond immediate operational requirements. The transformation from hidden observer to active participant represented both professional validation and personal risk that could compromise her ability to complete the broader investigation that had brought her to the base 18 months. Earlier, the helicopter flight to Catalina Island carried Victoria through weather conditions that would have challenged conventional aircraft operations, though the modified MH-6 Seahawk demonstrated capabilities that justified its selection for missions requiring performance beyond standard parameters. The pilot's navigation through gusting winds and deteriorating visibility showcased skills that reflected extensive training with special operations requirements, while the aircraft's specialized equipment enabled precise positioning despite atmospheric conditions that would have prevented normal maritime operations. Victoria's preparation during the flight incorporated final adjustments to equipment that had been modified to meet the extraordinary demands of the tactical situation awaiting the rescue team. The sniper rifle she carried represented the culmination of decades of weapons development combined with field modifications that addressed systematic maintenance failures while optimizing performance for the specific engagement parameters that intelligence analysis had identified as critical for mission success. The research vessel's position relative to the coastline created tactical challenges that required precision, shooting under conditions that pushed the absolute limits of what current technology could accomplish, even when operated by personnel whose capabilities exceeded normal military standards. The target identification requirements alone demanded visual acuity and analytical skills that had been developed through years of experience with similar operations, though the current mission presented unique complications that hadn't appeared in previous scenarios. Foster's coordination with Victoria during the approach phase reflected his recognition that the mission's success depended on capabilities that exceeded his team's recent training experience, though his leadership ensured that his personnel maintained confidence levels that would support effective performance during the most demanding phases of the operation. The tactical modifications that incorporated Victoria's expertise had transformed the rescue plan from desperate attempt into calculated operation with realistic probability of success. The insertion point that Victoria had selected provided optimal sight lines to the research vessel, while maintaining sufficient distance to prevent detection by adversaries, whose demonstrated sophistication suggested awareness of standard military approach procedures. The terrain features that enabled concealed positioning had been identified through analysis of satellite imagery, combined with experience-based assessment of defensive positions that terrorists might establish to protect their operational advantages. Dr. Nakamura's medical team maintained readiness for casualty treatment that reflected collaboration between standard trauma protocols and specialized procedures that Victoria's operational experience had identified as critical for precision engagement scenarios. The medical preparation incorporated techniques for treating injuries that might result from high-velocity ballistics effects, ensuring that rescue personnel and hostages would receive optimal care regardless of complications that might develop. During mission execution, Lieutenant Rodriguez coordinated communications between the operational team and higher command levels while maintaining documentation that would enable post-mission analysis of techniques that exceeded current training standards. Her position provided opportunities to observe capabilities that represented innovations in special operations methodology, professional development that would influence her approach to military leadership throughout her career while contributing to institutional knowledge that could benefit future operations. The initial reconnaissance that Victoria conducted through her scope revealed defensive positions that confirmed intelligence estimates while identifying additional complications that required tactical adjustments to ensure mission success without compromising hostage safety. The terrorists' positioning demonstrated professional competence that exceeded typical criminal organizations, suggesting military training that would affect engagement procedures and casualty expectations during the rescue operation. Victoria's assessment of environmental conditions incorporated atmospheric factors that would affect bullet trajectory over the extended engagement distance, meteorological analysis that enabled her to calculate compensation techniques that would ensure accuracy despite wind patterns and humidity levels that changed continuously throughout the operational timeline. The precision required for successful target engagement under these conditions demanded capabilities that existed at the intersection of technical expertise and intuitive understanding that few individuals ever developed. The communication intercepts that intelligence personnel provided during the operation revealed terrorist awareness of American response capabilities that suggested inside knowledge of military procedures and equipment limitations, information that could have been obtained through the same corruption networks that Victoria had been investigating. The adversaries' confidence in their defensive positions reflected understanding of training deficiencies that would affect conventional rescue operations, tactical advantages that Victoria's participation had effectively neutralized, fosters team established supporting positions that would enable immediate assault following Victoria's precision engagement of terrorist sentries, coordination that required timing accuracy measured in seconds rather than minutes. The tactical sequence demanded perfect execution by all personnel involved, though Victoria's capabilities provided margins for error that transformed the operation from impossible challenge into manageable risk with acceptable probability of success for both rescue personnel and hostages. The first shot that Victoria fired demonstrated why her legendary status had been earned through achievements that exceeded normal military performance standards, eliminating a terrorist sentry at maximum range under conditions that would have challenged the most experienced conventional snipers. The engagement occurred without alerting other adversaries to the rescue operation's commencement, providing tactical surprise that enabled subsequent phases of the mission to proceed according to optimized timelines. The sequence of precision engagements that followed showcased techniques that had been developed through classified programs, while demonstrating innovations that would influence special operations training for years following the mission's completion. Victoria's ability to maintain accuracy despite changing environmental conditions and multiple target requirements reflected capabilities that existed at levels rarely achieved by military personnel regardless of training investment or operational experience. The terrorist leader's attempt to execute hostages in response to the rescue operation was prevented through Victoria's intervention at ranges that exceeded the technical specifications of available equipment. Precision shooting that demonstrated how superior technique could overcome mechanical limitations when applied by personnel whose capabilities exceeded design parameters. The life-saving engagement occurred under time pressure that eliminated opportunities for careful preparation, requiring instantaneous assessment and perfect execution that preserved innocent lives while maintaining operational security. Foster's assault team exploited the tactical advantages created by Victoria's precision work, securing the research vessel through coordinated action that demonstrated how elite capabilities could be enhanced through collaboration with legendary expertise. The hostage rescue proceeded without casualties among rescue personnel or captives, operational success that validated tactical modifications while establishing precedents for future operations requiring similar capabilities under extreme conditions. The evidence recovered from the terrorist organization revealed connections to corruption networks that extended throughout the military command structure, documentation that provided Victoria with proof needed to expose systematic failures that had compromised training standards and operational readiness. The intelligence materials confirmed her assessment that institutional problems exceeded individual misconduct, representing conspiracy that threatened military effectiveness, while enriching participants through fraud that diverted resources intended for personnel protection. Captain Reeves's arrest followed immediately upon the team's return to base, as the evidence recovered during the hostage rescue operation provided prosecutors with documentation sufficient to support charges that would result in significant prison sentences for everyone involved in the corruption conspiracy. The systematic nature of the fraud that had been exposed ensured that military justice proceedings would address institutional failures while implementing reforms that would prevent similar problems from compromising future operations. The court-martial proceedings that followed revealed the complete scope of corruption that had affected training standards throughout the regional command, with testimony that established connections between maintenance failures and personnel. Casualties that included Victoria's son among victims of systematic negligence. The evidence that Victoria had gathered during 18 months of investigation provided prosecutors with comprehensive documentation that supported convictions resulting in lengthy prison sentences for corrupt officials, while generating financial settlements for affected families. Military reform implementation proceeded with unprecedented speed as higher command levels recognized that the exposed corruption represented threats to operational readiness that extended far beyond individual installations, systematic problems that demanded comprehensive intervention to restore institutional integrity. The training modifications that had compromised precision shooting capabilities were reversed through new protocols that emphasized technical competence over administrative convenience. Changes that would protect future military personnel from preventable casualties. Dr. Nakamura's medical analysis of the rescue operation provided documentation that would influence trauma treatment protocols throughout the special operations community, while her collaboration with Victoria during mission preparation established professional relationships that would continue through consulting arrangements that enhanced medical support capabilities for future operations, requiring similar expertise. Lieutenant Rodriguez received assignment to advance training programs that would prepare her for leadership responsibilities in special operations units, professional development that reflected her demonstrated capabilities during crisis management, while providing her with opportunities to apply lessons learned from observing legendary performance under extreme conditions. Her documentation of Victoria's techniques contributed to training materials that would benefit future military personnel whose missions required similar capabilities. Foster's team received recognition for operational excellence that acknowledged both their professional competence and their adaptability when circumstances required collaboration with capabilities that exceeded their previous experience. The mission's success established precedents for incorporating legendary expertise into current operations while demonstrating how institutional flexibility could enhance military effectiveness when properly managed through appropriate command channels. Victoria's return to civilian life carried the satisfaction of knowing that her son's death had been avenged through justice that addressed systematic corruption while implementing reforms that would protect future military personnel from preventable casualties. The memorial service that she organized for Miguel could now acknowledge the complete truth about his sacrifice while honoring the changes that his death had ultimately inspired through her determination to expose institutional failures. The consulting contract that Victoria accepted with Special Operations Command provided opportunities to influence training development while maintaining the flexibility that civilian status offered for investigation of problems that might require unofficial approaches to achieve resolution. Her expertise would continue serving military personnel through direct contribution to capability development while enabling her to identify and address systematic problems before they resulted in operational failures. The base community's understanding of Victoria's true identity had been fundamentally altered through revelations that transformed their appreciation for the people they worked with daily. Institutional learning that would influence how personnel assessed capabilities and recognized expertise that might not conform to expected patterns. The relationship she had developed with base personnel continued through mutual respect that acknowledged both her achievements and her commitment to protecting military personnel through whatever means proved necessary. Commander Harrison's Final report documented operational success that established new standards for crisis response, while acknowledging the critical contribution of capabilities that exceeded routine military parameters. His recommendations emphasized maintaining institutional flexibility that could accommodate legendary expertise when circumstances required performance beyond standard training levels, administrative modifications that would enhance future operational effectiveness through improved personnel utilization. The training programs that incorporated Victoria's techniques began producing precision shooters whose capabilities exceeded previous standards, while reducing the time required for personnel to achieve operational readiness, efficiency improvements that provided both cost savings and enhanced military effectiveness. The innovations she had shared would continue benefiting military personnel for decades through training materials that preserved her expertise for future generations of warriors who would face similar challenges. The corruption investigation that Victoria's evidence had enabled continued expanding throughout the military command structure, with additional arrests and court-martial proceedings that addressed systematic problems, extending beyond individual installations. The financial recovery from fraud prosecutions provided resources for training improvements, while demonstrating institutional commitment to maintaining operational readiness through proper resource allocation rather than administrative shortcuts that compromised personnel safety. Victoria's legacy within the special operations community reflected achievements that transcended individual missions to encompass contributions that would influence military effectiveness for generations through training innovations and institutional reforms that addressed systematic problems. Her willingness to abandon anonymity when circumstances demanded intervention had preserved lives, while exposing corruption that threatened military readiness, heroism that exemplified the highest traditions of military service. The quiet satisfaction that Victoria found in her civilian life reflected the knowledge that justice had been achieved for her son, while future military personnel would benefit from reforms that addressed the systematic failures that had cost so many lives. The ghosts that had driven her investigation could finally rest, replaced by purpose that would continue serving military personnel through expertise that would never truly retire from protecting those who served their country with honor and distinction. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.